Last Things Livestream. Welcome, everyone. I'm here at the studio of J.G. Thirlwell, and it's a very special one. Very excited to have the maestro here. You know what I usually do? I usually gab a little bit up front,
Okay.
just kind of let people trickle in. You know, most people don't just hop on it right at 3. But yeah, it's been a while since I've done a live stream. Don't worry, the channel is not totally slowing down. Yeah, more monologues coming, more live streams coming, but this one is I've been preparing for a while. So, also, you know, the sort of the technical setup here is like a little bit complex, or more complex than normal. So please, if there's a sound issue, anything like that, go for it in the comments. I'm going to be, we won't get to every single comment, but we will be keeping our eyes on that. So, here we are. I should basically figure that that Jim needs no introduction, given the audience. But I mean, I guess you never know. Jim has had a million super influential projects since the '80s, since the early '80s, beginning with Foetus, and then starred Maximus, Manorexia. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Venture Brothers and other TV and film work. So let's just kind of ease in. How you doing, Jim?
All right. Well, we might preface this by saying that it's a blazing hot day in New York, and I don't have adequate AC in my loft, so we're sweating it out here. And if there's a background hum, it's from fans that are trying to cool us down.
Yes. This is the noise situation here. Is like some background noise with the fans. It's actually very pleasant in here as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, there's a floor. It's a noise floor.
Yeah.
A big, thick, carpeted.
Yeah, exactly.
Noise floor.
Yeah. So put a noise gate on if you.
Yeah, we'll figure it. Yeah, I'll probably annoy you on how to fix, on how to like EQ. You know, like send me a notch EQ thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we did, you know, by the way, we never really talked about how, I mean, last time I was here, we did that long interview with Lamar, and this was from some of the viewers know my old, but the old podcast, Fluid Exchange, which was me and M. Lamar doing it, and we interviewed you, but then the second season never happened because I moved to LA. So that interview, sadly, it's still there. I think Lamar might put it out on his channel at some point. But hopefully we won't totally retread too much of that. I mean, I have new ways that I kind of want to steer this.
Okay.
Well, you know, why don't I just throw out general issues that we don't have to get to, but just things that kind of bounce around in my head when I'm like, I want to talk to someone who's been influential to me and is, you know, further along, you know, 20 years deeper in his career, and just would someone like you has like a body of work, you know, where it's not just one project, but it's really multifaceted. I'm really into just what different projects and different phases have meant to you just in your life, you know, not just like the aesthetic changes are obvious, the aesthetic consistencies are obvious, you know, over time, but like
And inconsistencies.
Which is, I love that. Yeah, I love what changes, what doesn't change. Things that you've maybe left behind, you know, or things that, because I've just in recent years shed things and revisited things, you know, or things that I thought I had left behind permanently and now I'm returning to, things that I thought would always be there and now it's like, no way. And I just, I always am interested in just someone such as yourself who's done so many different influential things, like just what, I'd be interested to start with just what you're doing right now as far as like the next upcoming thing, and then maybe work backward and outward from there.
We should also probably preface it with the fact that you and I have a history somewhat, you know, in having crossed paths, and I've been following your career for many years, and we've, you know, had, you know, I did a remix for Extra Life.
That's right.
And, you know, I've watched, you know, I'm a big fan of your work, so, you know, that's, you know, we should start from that basis.
Yeah, that means a lot to me.
Oh.
Yeah, you heard it here, guys.
Well, what I'm working on now is this year. It's been a weird time with we're coming out of the pandemic, and but I did release 2 albums in the last year or so. The latest album being the second I've done under the name Zordocks, which is an all electronic thing, which was released by Editions Migo, and that came about. The initial impetus of that coming about was actually indirectly from John Zorn, who invited me to perform at the Stone, his club, for the centenary of William Burroughs. And first I said no, I don't have anything. Then I thought I just borrowed a mini Moog, and I'd been putting it through through my laptop and just making arpeggio sequences and plugging other things in and stuff. And I thought, well, I could do something like this. The Stone holds 75 people, so if it sucks, it's not such a disaster. And I'd wanted to collaborate with Sarah Lipstate for some time.
I know Sarah a little bit. I just ran into her in LA. I was
Yeah.
sitting at a pizza place eating utterly substandard pizza. She walked by. I was like, Sarah Lipstate. Anyway,
Yeah. So I came up with some pieces, and then I invited Sarah, said to Sarah, are you in town on this date? Maybe this is a chance for us to do something together. And so she was actually just coming back into town for that date, and so I think we got 1 rehearsal in or 2 rehearsals in. I showed her the parts, I said, you come in here, you play these notes, blah, blah, blah. And she had, she's a great sculptor of sound. And,
Yes.
So it was an interesting other element to throw in there. So that was, it wasn't called Zordocks at that point. It was just J.G. Thirlwell and Sarah Lipstate, and so that was the formative part of it. And we did some more shows like that. But then Sarah eventually moved to L.A. and dropped off, and and I wanted to turn this into an album. Started, turn Zordocks into an album, and started expanding the material. And so she's on parts of the first album, and then the rest is me, and then this new second album is just me. Both albums came out on Editions Migo, which is an Austrian label. Puts out a lot of electronic stuff, a lot of interesting stuff. And I have done it live a few times with Simon, since it became Zordocks, with Simon Haynes being the other member of the live iteration. In the studio is just me. So that comes from the sonically, what I'm going for is any rhythms are derived from the synths and the pulsing of the synths, and sounds from the synthesizers as opposed to drum sounds. And it does have, I find it difficult to get away from things being cinematic in some ways. It does have a cinematic quality to it.
Always.
It has a lot of the titles are referencing space travel and so on. It's going to be a trilogy, and another idea behind it was, when I noticed that when I go to, say, a record fair or something like that, I tend to go to the electronic section, and I flip through and I pick up something that I've never heard of, and I look at the cover, and then I can tell whether I'm going to engage with it from the song titles.
Yes.
That was something that I wanted someone to discover Zordocks on that level,
Yeah.
So that's kind of some of the backstory of Zordocks.
Okay, yeah. So actually it really began with, aside from the Stone thing, but with the analog synth as you're sort of generating.
Well, what's interesting also about Zordocks is it began as a performance project,
Right.
which none of my other projects will. I guess in some ways the 2 solo electronic things I've been doing the last few years, which are called Color and Nocebo and Silver Mantis, were both conceived as performance projects, which will be backward engineered into surround sound albums. But that's unusual for me for something to start as a performance project and work back.
Yeah, that's right. It's Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're back in action here. As always, mention in the comments if the sound is janky, if we are not live again or something like that. In any case, Jim is very patient. And so we were talking about Zordocks and how it was sort of beginning. It was one of the first things that you've done that began from a performance place rather than from a recording place. Yeah. But I mean, as far as the music itself, have you done other stuff where it begins with a piece of equipment like that, like a single? You know, because I always think of your studio stuff as being like maximalist, traditionally, tons of different sounds.
I knew that I wanted it to be using electronic instruments, but all of my projects have parameters. They all have rules, which I often bend. But yeah, so that just happens to be the rule. You know, I haven't. Well, I mean, you know, I'm doing an album of string quartets, and so that's going to have that limitation, if you want to call it that, or that's what I'm going to explore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I do like to have parameters.
Yeah. Was there? I'm interested in what parameters we choose deliberately and which ones we kind of naturally end up gravitating towards. You know.
I think what happens for me is when I start a new project, it's a blank canvas, and that's exciting because
All right, take 3. Being mature adults, we're not yelling, we're not dark about it. It's great. Yeah, seems like everyone's still tuned in. So yes, talking about setting a precedent with a certain project, you're dialed into certain parameters, and then you sort of fulfill them. It's like sort of an assignment almost that you give yourself, right?
Well, I think different people have different approaches to that. I mean, you could say, for example, the Ramones repeated the same formula endlessly. Maybe they did some slower songs, they used some different producers, stuff like that, but there was the core of what they did.
Absolutely.
I kind of like to build on what I've done and try to, some areas of each project might have things that I want to continue to explore, but I want the vocabulary to expand and for it to have a forward momentum.
Yeah. Yes, because it's cool to have so many different projects, but then each one is also developing. It's not like it's a fragmented. It's not like you fragmented all the monikers for the purpose of locking in like static aesthetics that don't change. Like each one evolves, right?
And sometimes they cross-pollinate as well.
Yeah. I mean, the last Foetus record was quite different in a lot of ways. I mean, at least there were elements, at least compared to the early Foetus stuff. I mean, obviously you're talking about like 20, 30 years, I guess, there, but it's like there were some elements, like I almost heard some like XTC or something, or
There was psychedelia definitely infused. Psychedelia was infused, opera was infused in it, which were things that I guess I wanted to explore in a circuitous way.
Yeah.
Word. And I mean, psychedelia, for example, was a form that I was a little too young for, when it was happening at the time, and so I came to it a little later. And that's an interesting form because it was, in its purest form, it was actually very short-lived that time. I mean, maybe 66, 69,
Yeah.
And then a lot of the bands that were practicing in that area went off into other things, which might be blues rock or prog rock or, pop or whatever. And I think some of the hallmarks of psychedelia were experimentation and experimenting with musical forms, instrumentation, production techniques, and things like that. And that's what sort of drew me back to that era at that time. When I was, resynthesizing that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I could see that. It's also I think about how you've kept Foetus going with breaks for all those years, but and then the recent things, there's new elements and it sounds as inspired as ever, but yet it's obviously not, as far as the amount of time that you're putting. It's not the number one. It seems like you're just spending more time doing things other than Foetus. So that's kind of I'm interested in just how, I don't know, like you get older, like over time, just are there like aspects? Is that more of like a practical thing where you're just getting all these, commissions and stuff to do other things, or is it you're actually feeling Foetus like differently, like it means something different to you, like in your life? Or about
Both
yourself?
of those things. I mean, like a lot of it's been driven by the fact that I do a lot of scoring work, and I do like 2 animated shows, and that eats up a hell of a lot of time, and so those shows have actually brought a lot to my various writing disciplines and the way that I work, and shown me the merits of approaching music as problem solving.
Yes.
And having a palette to work with, and we were talking about parameters before, but they're a show like the musical world I made with Archer, for example, it's very broad. I mean, because they go to a lot of different places. There was a whole season in outer space, and they can be in like Singapore, or they can be in there's so within and there's a lot of variety in mood and emotion and so on. So I get to tap into a lot of things, but I'm part of a team where what I'm hoping to bring is going to elevate the work,
Yeah.
And I'm working in a prescribed time frame and things like that. So that's been, and also there's just a huge volume of work. I mean, I've done so much music for those shows. I mean, I'm just coming up on my 50th episode of Archer, and
is it really that many? That's wow.
Well, I came in on season 6, so the first 6 seasons they were using needle drop, and and then I've done about 75 episodes of Venture Brothers, so that's brought a lot. That's brought a lot to my toolbox, but at the same time, it's depleted a project like Steroid Maximus, for example, because all of the ideas that I would have ever put into a Steroid Maximus album have all come out in Venture Brothers and Archer and
right. That's right.
Like
Yeah. That's how those are released. I mean, it's really like so much of those of that scoring work does. I mean, the translation from the earlier Foetus stuff to that is not a crazy stretch. I mean, it's very much. It's very clear that
Well, there was always a cinematic element in what
always,
I did.
Always.
But then I look at a project like Foetus, and I have been working on new Foetus material, but it's been really puzzling. It's like, like I always said with Zordocks, it's easy to write a Zordocks song, but it's hard to write a really good Zordocks song, And so I will write a ton of material that just is not up to par. And it's the same with Foetus. With Foetus, I've been scratching my head because, I'm working on a new album, but what should it be? And I know that I wanted to explore new musical vocabularies. I wanted to build on what happened before. I don't want it to be a rerun. I want it to be, something that is kind of seismic in that fetal universe.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I've written a ton of material, but I only want to use the material that really moves me. So I've got to write a lot of, you have to go through the fire.
Yeah.
The fire of failure, the fire of this isn't working.
Yeah. Especially when something's not, it's like Foetus, where it's not super collaborative. It's very much your own self-contained world that you have to be so hard on yourself because you don't have other people checking you, right? I mean, it's like, whereas I suppose with Venture Brothers Archer, you're like, there's an inherent like sort of
I mean, those have been collaborative in that, really you're and any scoring work, you're really working with the director, and you're really working to to deliver on the picture.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I think about Foetus, this is something that's sort of like a personal thing of mine, just for like thinking about my work and the evolution and where things are changing. Just the role of the voice is just something that for me, that what I do, it's like the voice is so central.
Yeah.
But then I do things which are purely instrumental, and they end up being quite different and have been quite different in the past. So I don't know. I'm always, when I think about Foetus versus your other stuff, I mean, that is kind of the main thing. And I don't know. I was like watching these old interviews with you from way back, and just it was interesting. Like just hearing you talk about, like, there was someone asked something. This is like in the 80s. They were like, how much do you feel like, image and persona are like a big part of what you do? And you were like, it's not. This is pure music. It's about the pure music, But then I also think it's like when you're singing and when there's lyrics, there is automatically like kind of a persona or something. I mean, there's like what your location as a like subjective like human being kind of is located or perceived differently in the music, even though a lot of your stuff that's not Foetus has so many aesthetic things in common, but just the role of the voice, like, I don't know, just like in recent past 20 years, do you feel differently about singing? Does that mean something different to you?
Sometimes I think it's just totally stupid to sing, and that's a kind of a bit of a barrier that I'm walking through at the moment. That is, it just stupid to sing, but I absolutely inhabit personas when I'm doing not always. Sometimes they're first person, but so often they're third person or they're second person, and I'm singing from a character. I'm singing, and what I'm espousing is the exact opposite of what I think.
Yes.
Because I'm inhabiting that character to make a point, and sometimes that has been misconstrued. Especially when the point you're making is about the sickness of our culture, the sickness of our world, misogyny or whatever, and I don't deny that in the very early Foetus material, it was what I was probably referring to in a something like that, where I'm divorcing myself from it, is that I did want Foetus to be and have an air of anonymity, so that I wasn't beholden to it being personality driven. It's just that it's really hard to keep that up when you're performing live and things like that, and that was also inspired by The Residents, which were a very formative early influence on me, and so creating a mythology around what I did.
Yes.
And then the mythology fell away when it was just too hard to keep up. And then, I was inhabiting characters in certain songs to make certain points. And also in that early stuff, there were, I don't deny that there was, if you look at the names, you've got Foetus on your breath, scraping Foetus off the wheel. There's an element of shock in there. Which was inspired both by punk rock and Dadaism and other elements like that. I don't feel the need to do that now.
Yeah, that's clear.
I feel like there's other people that can take that mantle up quite capably. And it's just not what I'm about.
Yes.
I'm more about exploring other things.
Yeah. But at the time you were. At the time that felt really vital. Did that at the time feel like an essential part of what you were doing, or was it kind of just like, I'm an artist making intense music, and then also there's this sort of... It was definitely part of it, and it was also part of my humor as well. Yeah. It was that whole bundle. Yeah, because I think what to me sets you apart in a completely amazing way from a lot of people that were, I don't know, like other artists in sort of 80s at the time, like just anything that's sort of like transgressive or like edgy computational art is the humor, and also that, like you were saying, like with having there be a certain anonymity and also the sort of inhabiting of third person characters. I've always liked that it seemed like, unlike some people, your vibe was never like, I'm this scary guy personally, like, you know what I mean? It was like it always seemed to have this thing. Of course, I wasn't alive at the time.
There was, in some of the live performances there, I was kind of inhabiting the character that I was singing from in certain ways, and there was a certain antisocial element to that,
Okay, yeah, yes, yeah. So it became real
to that, but it never became literal.
Yes, right. Well, especially with some of those songs, it's like literally just straight up violence, which you assume you don't do. I don't. To me though, there's something.
Not everyone shared the sense of humor,
Yeah. I kind of the other thing just that runs through. Wait, you know what? I'm sorry. Let me just check to see if this is if the comments are actually happening.
This is how you know it's live.
Yeah, people on YouTube. Yes, you are. We can answer them or not.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say
anyway.
is just on the topic of sort of inhabiting characters versus literally being the character, etc. Is is it literary or is it just autobiographical? I always, from the very beginning, even just the first Foetus record, just craft has been a big part of it. Like as noisy and as raw and as fucked up or whatever as a lot of the sounds are, it's always had this careful, like thoughtful vibe.
Oh yeah.
And see, I don't know if that shows up. I don't know if that registers the same way to non-musicians as it does to musicians. But to me, when I hear that level of craft and like nuance and just like obvious labor, it automatically feels sane to me. Like I'm like, no matter how, fucked up on drugs this person is.
Yeah. I mean, there's always been, a lot of sculpting and care in, meticulous. I mean, I used to feel like I was chasing perfection, and it's just obvious that it's unattainable.
Yeah.
Whatever I do, which I feel like is perfect, a week later it's full of flaws.
Yeah.
And that's fine too, because it's where you were at that time. And a lot of the work that I've done that people love and think is my finest work, I don't think it is at all. I think that there's much better stuff. But that's fine. I mean, I think that there's a great. I think there's a lot of range in what I've done, and
Absolutely.
And it's been over 40 years. So I mean, of course, I'm going to be more invested in what I'm doing now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I for a while the stuff that people said was my best stuff, I was just like, ugh, no, it isn't. I've left that behind. But just recently, I've been kind of like, you know what? Some of these people are actually kind of right, and I'm actually gonna, for once, kind of take people's feedback. I don't know if that sounds like taking requests or pandering, but I'm like, you know what? People had a point.
About your own work?
Yeah, about my own stuff. Just being like, you know what? X, Y, and Z was actually kind of better than the more recent stuff. I'm gonna like maybe I'm not completely done with these certain currents.
But you said you were talking about resuscitating Extra Life.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if that's definitely happening, but we'll see. We'll see. What was I gonna say? Yeah, well, talking about just like striving for perfection, and of course understanding that you're not gonna get it, and that being part of the thing. But just even to bring up that just to talk about your work the way you're doing it, where it's like striving for just excellence. That is different than a lot of so-called noise music. I mean, not that people call you noise, but whatever, industrial, no wave. I know you don't like the I word, but whatever scenes or ideas or labels that people might have like affiliated with you in the past. Your stuff speaks to me in a particular way because it has that thing of not, even with the to whatever extent the lyrics are confrontational or there's violence or these sort of more like degenerate aspects or whatever, I never have experienced Foetus as being like, or your recent stuff as being like, dude, what even is music? I mean, what does it even mean? Does this even matter? It doesn't have that kind of questioning. It always had this thing of like, this is just trying to be great and powerful,
I have done, you probably haven't heard these projects, but Color and Nocebo and Silver Mantis. And Silver Mantis, those have both been performance-driven solo electronic vehicles where I have a visual. They're in surround sound, and I'm able to. There's a within a framework. There's a bunch of improvisation. I can stretch. I can recombine sounds. I can do it all on the fly. There's a section where I do prepared piano section. And that's a much more modular thing. But also all of the building blocks in that most of the building blocks in that are not musical building blocks. They're audio building blocks. They're really interesting sounds that work in a certain way together. And that's something that I started exploring with Manorexia, where I guess the easiest term to use around that is musique concrète.
Yes, that's right.
But
yeah.
it's using concrete type elements to build compositions live in real time, and they expand and contract, and then there's a certain time when I capture it, and then that'll be the definitive document of it.
Mm-hmm.
So possibly to that sort of raises the question of what is music, and sometimes.
Yeah,
because it's
I
sort
feel
of
that.
it's almost like is this sound design,
Right. There's extra musical elements. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not like punk negative, like it's not that kind of anti-musical.
No,
it's harsh noise
it's
guy.
Super,
vibe.
it's super seductive in its ways of
Yeah. I mean, and just the sort of the way you're talking about what it's like, that's having extra musical elements and doing having extra musical elements be important in the music, but it seems like it's very much in a sort of futuristic composer kind of like expansive way, and not so much in this sort of I don't know, like noise way. I don't mean to malign noise music, but you know what I mean? It has that positive sort of like exploratory vibe,
Yeah, it has. I mean, I'm not really using that as an avenue to make eardrums bleed or anything like that.
To make what?
Eardrums bleed.
Yeah.
Which is not to denigrate noise. I think there's a lot of people who are doing, great stuff with it. And expanding that vocabulary, and
Yeah, for sure.
I don't feel the need to perform in that way.
Yeah. So I mean, as far as like this, like the cinematic kind of element, I mean, it's funny because I was gonna ask you, like, I was gonna have this be like, let's do it all about one favorite soundtrack that you have, but we don't need to do that, of course, but I was interested in just some influences that you had mentioned in various interviews that I would like not have expected. You were naming some like really mainstream composers. I mean, I think you're giving respect to like Hans Zimmer and people who really are masters, but I just wouldn't know exactly, because I mean, did you like, you've always had the cinematic element, but I mean, were you intending on doing film scores back in the 80s and stuff?
No, but it's always been music that I responded to. And when we were talking about, soundtracks that have resonated with me, my earliest musical memories are soundtracks.
Yeah.
And basically the soundtracks to Warner Brothers cartoons.
Yes.
And most of which were composed or rearranged by Carl Stalling. And that was, for me, and probably for a lot of my contemporaries or a lot of other people, some of my earliest exposure to like classical music, but in a kind of a messed up, cut up kind of way, a very illustrative kind of way, and also the way that music was used in that is, which is known as Mickey Mousing, even though Mickey Mouse is not in that, but every gesture is scored and illustrated with
very one-to-one with the visual and the rhythm and the cadences.
So that was a very early musical memory and soundtrack memory, I guess, and then the next soundtracks that I remember really noticing are like spaghetti westerns and stuff, and you sort of forget that at the time those spaghetti westerns were actually the music from those spaghetti westerns were actually it was everywhere. It was there were hit singles.
Right. Yeah. Ennio Morricone.
And Hugo Montenegro and stuff like that. And,
Yeah, him I haven't actually checked out so much.
That's Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, you know. And,
Oh, wasn't
yeah.
that wasn't Ennio Morricone? That's,
Well, the hit single was made by Montenegro.
Oh, okay, all right. I should know that.
I believe. And so, you know, so those things infiltrate. But when you mentioned wanting to talk about a soundtrack album and explore that, one thing that struck me as another, you know, soundtrack that really resonated with me was actually the soundtrack of The Shining, and probably a lot of people.
Yeah. Yes.
Probably a lot of people cite that, but that was also like a really great introduction to Penderecki and Ligeti and
Yeah. Shining in 2001 also.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
you know, yeah.
So that opened a lot of sonic worlds to me when I then went further into Penderecki and the ways that different ways that the timbres that can come out of an orchestra.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I mean, film music and TV, I mean, that's what classical music basically is if you're going to tell someone about it. Like, you know, I've done all this work, like teaching little kids various, like, after-school programs and stuff, trying to, like, expose them musical history. Try to teach them what classical music is. And you show somebody, you know, St. Matthew's Passion or something, and you're like, look, this is this guy Bach. I mean, they don't care, you know, but if you're just like, what is classical music? You're like, it's from the movies. They're like, oh, I know what that is. Right, those sounds immediately. And then you're like, for 20th century modernist stuff, you're like, horror movie music. They're like, yep, there it is. They know. So it's like, that's, I mean, I wonder if to an extent you could just have an entire classical music, I mean, like, approach that is like just coming from like film, and you know what I mean? It's sort of like, it's like the whole history is like condensed.
Yeah.
You know, in a sense, like processed, you know,
yeah,
in a
there's
modern
been
way.
a lot of crossover. You know,
Yeah.
even composers working in that, you know, scoring and so on.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that for me is kind of like hard to, I don't know if hard's the right word, but something that as I write more for like classical instruments and do that in different contexts, the thing that I end up not really absorbing from classical music, from traditional, like, you know, the actual canon, is like formal stuff. You know, like I care about form, I think about form, but it does tend to be more blocks, you know, which is sort of more from a rock thing and more from a film and TV thing, and less, and from like Ligeti or something. I mean, you know, that and Stravinsky, Ligeti, you know, those guys have blocks. But like going back, like I don't know if it's like an attention. Yeah, for me, I don't know if it's like an attention span thing or something, but like I just cannot or wouldn't really want to write music that deals with process or narrative structures like sonata, fugue, etc. You know what I mean?
I mean, I'm aware of those conventions. You know, you talk about working in blocks. When I write for, you know, like, you know, in a composition for, you know, in the new music idiom, I kind of work in cells, which is kind of, I guess, similar to blocks. Where I work in parts that I feel work well independently together, but I start off with a template, and the template is the instrumentation that I'm working with. And sometimes, and I'll have in the back of my head is, I know at some point I want to get to this point, and that point might be a vocal gesture, or it might be a crescendo, or it might be a series of crescendos or something like that. But I know how do I get there? And sometimes I'll write those first, you know, and then I'll recombine things, and then, you know, if there's I might sort of do a fuguey thing where I just repeat, you know, take, you know, copy and paste a part, or like, you know, switch out the instruments here, having, you know, playing the same thing, but, you know, give the cello part to the viola, and like, you know, and give
So starting from a blocky place, but then there will also then be some connective written type things that are a little bit more like linear. Or
yeah, but also because what I'm exploring at the moment in that form is something that does have a kind of a relentlessness and a kind of not really a lot of repeating stuff, but but something that is, it's almost like assaultive that changing all the time,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because that's really what I want to explore right now. And I feel like I might be, you know, getting to a greater place with that. I just did a really big piece for Alarm Will Sound.
Oh, they're great. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a 40-minute piece. And the start and end of that piece, I really explore that a lot. And so the start's about 12 minutes, and the end's about 16 minutes or something. And then in the middle, I explored some more instructional score, and then something that's a little bit more tonal, leading up to the end part. So it wasn't just 40 minutes of non-stop, you know, barrage, but because that's what I want to explore right now. But you know, there's so much in that world. When I listen to, you know, a lot of contemporary works, or even when I have to like sometimes go on YouTube and follow the score, you know.
I do that sometimes. That's fun.
Because I just like, how the hell did they do that? How the hell did they notate that? You know?
Yeah.
I didn't go to conservatory. I'm self-taught, so there's all sorts of shit that I don't know.
Yeah.
And that I would like to explore, but I'm just not capable of doing it. Maybe I will be capable of doing it in a few years.
Yeah. It's so cool though when you check out a score and you're like, you know what, that's actually a lot simpler than I thought it was, but I just wouldn't have been able to pick it out. But now that I see it, you're like, even just orchestral music in general, for years I was just like, I can't even imagine writing for like, I mean, they're all doing different stuff, oh my god. And then I started to actually study scores. I'm like, they're not all doing different stuff. There's like 2 or 3 elements, and they're just distributed. And then I'm like, oh right, it's just like working with synths. It's like, you know, it's sort of, I like realize it's not,
it's like bass guitar drums, pretty much.
Yeah, basically, man. It's just riff. Yeah. It's crazy. Stalling. Yeah. I mean, that's not crazy at all that you started with stalling. And like a lot of your contemporaries, I mean, Zorn, totally. I mean, didn't he studied with stalling, right?
Did he? I didn't know that.
I think so, yeah. I know like studying stalling was like a big...
Doesn't surprise me. I mean, he has that piece, Cat o' Nine Tails, which is totally like stalling.
That's one of the coolest of the Zorn. But working in blocks, man. So I'm like, let's think about like, what's the next? I mean, I saw you sing with Simon with Tredici Bocci, but you were doing. I mean, the last time I saw you sing was like, I think it was doing like classic Foetus hits, right?
The Sawdust show.
I think that was at Sawdust. But yeah, I mean, does Foetus have anything? Like
well, that's J.G. Thirlwell plus ensemble, and then that's a way of taking that material and revoicing it for a chamber group. So that's with viola and sometimes violin, doubling on violin, bass guitar doubling on acoustic guitar, harp, and piano. And so that I've done a couple of times. I was supposed to be doing it last year, a couple of times last year, pre-pandemic, although I've added more arrangements to that now, and that's a great way to explore it. But with Foetus, the last sort of rock band tour I did with Foetus was in 2001, I think.
Yeah.
And by the time I got to the end of that, I was just like, this is just not for me. I mean, it's just not. I had felt for some time that I was dumbing down the material by using that instrumentation, and then I'd sort of reached the end of the road with that. The next thing I did after that was when I got commissioned to perform Steroid Maximus as an 18-piece ensemble, which was out at UCLA, commissioned by David Sefton. And when I did that, that was like life-changing. Because then I felt like I could finally realize all the nuances in what I was doing, and it could be voiced by these acoustic instruments, even the electronic sounds being voiced by the acoustic instruments.
Yeah, I've seen that stuff. Yeah.
So I have done Foetus in that manner one time at a festival in Graz, it's outside of Vienna.
That's right.
And that I was supposed to do again last year for the 40th anniversary of Foetus at the Melbourne Festival, and I had all these amazing new arrangements and stuff, but it was cancelled. So because of the pandemic, that's the that's the only way I really want to do Foetus.
Yeah.
And it's so expensive, as you know.
It's the most impractical. That's kind of what I like, though, about so-called classical music situations, is that it's just on a practical level, it's just a terrible idea.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
I mean, it's
No.
just it's like
Yeah.
talk about dumb. You were like, is
Yeah.
singing. You're like, is singing dumb? I'm like, well, dropping like tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Project is kind of dumb, but it's awesome. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that many people playing together at all, especially on a high level. It's
I mean,
profound.
that's really when I feel like the music is realized and it's the way it always should have been, and every fiber of my being is alive, and
Yes.
and every headache that you had leading up to that moment was what melts away, and it was worth it, And stupidly, I haven't documented a lot of those things, especially in the culture today. Is that if you haven't documented something, it didn't exist.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But so in future, I would always document that more completely. But yeah, and then you've got to give credit to someone like Simon Haynes, who has Tradici Barci and can keep a 13-piece band.
Yeah,
going,
yeah. No, he's very important in what you're doing and just in what's going on in New York and stuff. Yeah, like not documenting stuff. Yeah, I have like 3 pretty big pieces from the past decade that I just didn't, like chamber pieces and stuff that I just didn't document. Because sometimes the players, like, you have to get permission. I mean, you would have to pay them all over again to release the thing, etc. And sometimes it's just like you're done with the project and you're like, I'm not gonna keep like.
I've also felt, we'll do this again, it'll happen, and of course you don't.
It does.
It never happens again. I mean, because that world is also, it tends to be all about the premiere.
Right.
And once you've premiered a work, it's a little harder to ever get it played again.
I know, yeah. Well, this is, I mean, it goes back to like Haydn or something, writing something for like the king's birthday or whatever. It's like once his birthday's gone, it's like that's it,
Next.
Not putting out a 12-inch of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, that is cool. Just I like, it's cool for me to hear just the way you're like, in a way you're like, okay, aspects of Foetus, you're like, no, over, but then you are resurrecting aspects of it for ensembles, and like things still feel fresh about it. So even though you're like, even though your whole thing is like forward, body of work expanding, it's like you're not completely disowning stuff.
No, but
It's
also I feel like Foetus, out of all of my projects, has a linear through line and a lot of musical development, and sort of tells a story. And then the next album that I make will be the last Foetus album, the next Foetus album, so I feel like I can now collect that work and maybe analyze it a little, or sort of, I think it's more, I thought it was more timely to do the chamber version of that, and it just came up, and it just, the instrumentation just popped into my head, and I think it works, and it's a way to get, explore that avenue, that part of myself, which, so now I have like several performance vehicles. There's Zordocks, there's Silver Mantis, and I just don't do them very often.
Yeah.
I mean,
but so you said that the next Foetus one is the last one. Definitely. So why? That's interesting. So like.
Well, it's the last in this. It's the last in this arc of work. This 40-year arc of work. There'll be an album and a companion album. The last 2 albums I've made companion albums, and the companion album is like the overspill, and also like some works that I've made in the interim between albums, which have become longer and longer. But yeah, that's that arc of work. Maybe down the line I would, that never means, never doesn't mean never.
No, of course, yeah.
And it might be I will anthologize some works, but yeah, that's basically the end of it. I feel of that arc.
Well, you must, I mean, not that you necessarily have to have an overly articulated, self-conscious answer, but I mean, it must be something in your personal, like your life. I mean, are you feeling like this cadence, like at this moment in your life, like?
Yeah, it's like a life's work, and and I think that I've also used, I'm I'm very conscious of my mortality, and much more so than, I mean, when I started Foetus, I couldn't have been less conscious about my mortality.
21. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. or
And
whatever, 20.
and now I am, and there's things that I want to do in this life, and I'm quite happy. You know, it's nice to put a little bow on it. You know.
Yeah. It's probably like when you start out doing something and it all has a certain. I'm sure you didn't use the word branding back then because it's such a shallow kind of word, but I mean it had this sort of the same, consistent aesthetic, consistent
I
name.
was quite happy to use a word like branding. I mean, if you look at the packaging on my stuff, because I come out of art school, and the visual forms that I was exploring in the Foetus album covers, which I did, started in art school way before Foetus, using the red, white, and black palette, and inspired by Russian revolutionary art and constructivism and things like that, but also by pop art, and by using the album cover as my canvas. So very much that in those days there would be like racking in record stores. So there were a lot of big record stores, and my idea was like, if you scanned the record store, your eye could fall on my records, and you would know what they were. So they did have an identity. There was branding.
No, it's a good
about them.
But I wonder, like at a certain point, you just want to break free of the thing that you. I mean,
Yeah.
It seems like at first, probably though, you imagined like everything was going to be within. Like I suppose Foetus only became a defined, like you had to do all these branch in all these other projects, whereas when you first started, like you thought everything you were going to do was going to be called Foetus, or
No, I mean, but I didn't think that that I'd be 60 and I would be answerable for the things that I did when I was 25, and or things that I said when I was 25, and who knew that there'd be a thing called the internet that would be unearthing things that you're answerable for so many things.
I have it. Yeah, I don't think you're canceled, man. I think you're good.
I'm not talking about canceling.
You're good.
But I'm
No,
talking
you're
about,
good, yeah.
but also,
aesthetically, you mean.
but also, I feel like a lot of people's knowledge of what Foetus is based on the records that I did in the 80s, and I feel like Foetus is something way different now.
Yeah, absolutely. I always loved that the Soviet aesthetic, where like a lot of your peers were going more on like the more the other way, more like the sort of fascist angle or something.
Yeah,
without necessarily believing in it, but just that, but just on both sides, the totalitarian.
I mixed it up. I mixed them all up. I mixed up. There were. There was World War II imagery from both sides, and there was Chinese revolutionary stuff mixed in with the Spanish Civil War, mixed in with communism. And all just kind of mangled.
Yeah.
And also the idea of the great designs that I would see on product aisles in the supermarket, and Warhol was a big influence on me,
Yeah, I never thought of that. That makes total sense. That those aesthetics are coming out of Warhol pop art. Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense.
That's what I liked about the medium of like I went into the studio to make records, make their compositions, but the idea was to make a product so that everyone could own an original of. It was a multiple.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Also interested, we're talking about the Soviet imagery, like, well, I'm in this weird mode where like everything in culture now is so politicized, and I'm having this moment where I'm like, don't talk about political stuff any more than is absolutely necessary, just kind of like trying to not be out of my lane with grabbing at political stuff. But I was thinking about how, Foetus, a lot of the older stuff and the newer stuff, to an extent over the past 20 years, it's like, are political dimensions to your lyrics and imagery and stuff, and I know you are active in local politics, I remember you saying, but it's also not super
Explicit?
like specifically ideological.
Some of it has been, some of it particularly, actually some of the work that I've done with Simon, and with Tradishi Bachi, some of those lyrics have been more specific, more politically pointed. But and there's a lot of political stuff in my lyrics that I don't name names, but I also use them as analogies for personal, personal politics.
Yeah. Because I mean, you're dealing a lot with like greed and lust and this kind of thing in the past. But then in recent, it seems like outer space has become sort of a thing, which is like totally.
Well, not in the lyrics.
Well, but in your conceptual, what you're dealing, which is not to say that space is an apolitical topic, especially if we get into colonizing Mars. There's going to be politics involved, and like who gets to go and who gets sent there as prisoners or whatever. But I do. I mean, has your stuff become? Well, you said the recent Tradishi Bachi stuff has some specific politics to it, but maybe.
Well, the space thing is also kind of like an extension of my obsessions about motion and macro and micro worlds, some of the outlets that I've had for that have been actually in sort of film work that I've been doing. If you like, I was commissioned to make this film for the Gotland Film Symposium, and it's called Sonder, and it's on my YouTube channel. And it's something that I'd wanted to do for a while, and it's all about motion, and it's going through tunnels and bridges and shows, and a lot of it's inspired by just being here and looking out my window, because the window is, you can see I'm 100 feet from the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. I can see the Manhattan Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, about 6 roadways.
It's so great. Man.
And sometimes what's meditative about it is that I see these disembodied vehicles going by, but in each vehicle there's a story, and there's someone who's has a destination, someone who's doing, but they're disembodied, and so it's kind of, when you sit back and you look at the entirety of it, which I can do from bed upstairs, then you get this macro world of, like looking at ants and looking at this motion, and then when you pull out further from that, like in the Zordocks, first Zordocks video, which is from outer space, it's kind of like the macro version of that.
Right.
I'm really interested in those things. And then with the album I made with Simon Steensland last year, definitely like the conceptual idea behind the title and the cover was more about micro. It's about bacteria and things like that. So I'm interested in those micro and macro worlds, and
where you just see like a million different systems. Some of them are like connected in macro systems, and some of them are just on their own little thing. I mean, that's New York to the core, and just being able to like look at that. I'm in LA now for the past couple of years. I'm moving back in a year and a half. I don't know if I told you that.
Oh, I thought you were moving back sooner than that.
No, but end of 2020, end of 2022. Like New Year's 2023. So I got some time out there. But yeah, LA is not like that. You don't look out your window and see ants, human ants and stuff. So this is just I love hearing this, just looking out and
Well, that it also comes from driving a lot too, because I am one of those ants, and the next Zordocks video, which I finished, but I haven't put out yet because the album is not available in the US yet. But the next Zordocks video is a real extension of those concepts, but using drone photography.
Oh, sick.
And the drone photography was done by this guy Benjamin Maddox.
I've heard that name. I'm not sure. Has he done a lot of that kind of thing? I'm not sure.
I think he has, but I don't know where where it's seen. But yeah, so there's a kind of a the deal with that started with Color Nocebo, which was an endless trip down the Long Island Expressway, which was a route that I took because someone I was in a relationship with at the time lived in Long Island, and we took this road over and over and over and over, and so we documented it into the 50-minute film, and then that sort of made me want to continue this motion narrative, which turned into Sonder, which is the film for the Gotland Symposium, and then it's continuing with the Zordocks videos and just that whole conception of those worlds, and that is and what happens when those things become an aesthetic and become the beauty of our civilization, and the way that it breathes like maggots in a corpse or something.
It breathes what?
Like maggots in a corpse.
Yeah. And this, this stuff, this way of looking at things, that's not political. I mean, at least if you're talking about systems within systems, there's that sensibility, but it's cool how it could be more or less specific with like a political or social element. What if we check out some comments or questions? There's going to be a bunch of them, but maybe I'll pick some that seem particularly fun to check out. Let's see what we got. We got some show us cactus. I don't know what this is. Cactus. They're talking about cactus.
Cactus. I've got a lot of cacti.
Road tickles him. That's my man Vasta. Yo, Vasta, man. I hope you're all right. You got some great enthusiasm. People love your cactus.
That's not a cactus up there. Oh, there's some cactus. Oh yeah, there are some cacti on the pinball machine.
Thought is underrated. Specific questions. No need to JG a message for big race. These are all things we know, man. This is why we're here. I don't know. What's like what kind of what would be like your coda to this? Do you have any like I don't know, any like we talked about what's coming up, immediately for you. We talked about the past quite a bit.
Well, there's the subsequent. The Zordocks album just came out. The next things I'm working on, as I mentioned, that we should be recording the string quartet album in September with Mivos Quartet, who you've worked with as well.
Yeah. Mivos is so killer.
Yeah, really great. That's been a long time in the works, but should do our first round of recording for that in September, and then subsequently, I'm not sure when that'll come out. The next things to come out will be we're in talks about an Archer soundtrack album, and then hopefully the Color Nocebo. I don't know when the Foetus thing will happen. It depends on the speed with which I write it,
Yeah.
And then I'm on the new Tradici Baci album, which is being mixed at the moment.
Oh, killer.
Simon and I wrote 2 songs together, and then they actually cover a Foetus song on that.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Mixing up. Is the string quartets? Is that some of the stuff, or maybe that's already been released? The stuff that I saw at the Noguchi or.
Oh yeah, actually.
That was like 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, one of the pieces was premiered at the Noguchi, and then there's another 4 pieces which I don't think we played that day. We may have played one other of them that day. There's one other commission, and then two other pieces that I'm writing specifically for that album. Then there's all of the Cronus Quartet string quartets as well, which are lying dormant. But I don't know what I'm going to do with those at this point. I don't think they're going to record them. But I
It's
would
so
like
weird.
to,
I know.
yeah.
It's like the classical music world. It's just like another galaxy of how things operate.
Yeah, well, I would love the Alarmal Sound thing to turn into an album. It's a
Well,
good
they
length
tend to record
for
stuff. I mean, isn't that
I hope
the
so.
time?
I hope so.
sort of people? No, this is all fine. Yeah, it's always interesting how like I'm always interested in thinking about like how a lot of the time aesthetics overlap between different like the lines between classical music, noise, rock, all this stuff. They are very blurred at this point, and yet it's a lot less blurred, the lines between musical operating scenes or modes of operating, if that makes sense. Like just the fact that like Alarm Will Sound will invariably be like a total fusion of so-called styles and like blur, you know, like not in a genre box because it's you and because it's them and
Yeah.
everything they do is kind of like that. But and yet though it ends up being like in the classical world as far
Yeah.
as where these things get presented, you know, and same thing with rock, you know, all the stuff I was doing with Extra Life, there's all these elements outside rock, but that was on rock labels, rock clubs, rock. It's just like it's interesting how the
Well,
you know,
I don't know what I mean, I know that there's a lot of great musicians in LA, but we're kind of spoilt by the new music scene in New York because it's so thriving and it's so vibrant. And
know.
I don't know if there's any other city in the world that has such a strong presence when
It's
you
crazy.
have like, you know, Ice and Bang on a Can and, you know, So Percussion and Mivos and Alarm Will
Killers.
Sound and we have permanent venues where, you know, you can see those works, and there's so many great composers and so many great players. So I think we kind of take for granted that there is this cross pollination, which might not happen everywhere else.
Yeah.
You know, in London or but the other thing is that I feel like, you know, the past 20, 30 years, the people that are coming out of music schools are probably more informed about, you know, like contemporary, you know, rock music or,
For sure.
you know, alternative music, electronic music, and improvising than maybe,
true.
you know, before, you know, 30 years before. So you are able to get players who, you know, and you know, the world that I come from, which is a kind of a solo composer in the studio, kind of a MIDI world. Sometimes I call on my, you know, the players to play like robots and want them to, and the players that are coming out can play like robots.
Yeah.
Whereas before they were taught not to play like robots, or you have to tell them to make that switch. You know?
Yeah.
But-
Molto Mechanico. Or,
yeah,
or
whereas
Mechanici.
Alarm Will Sound have made an album which was a cover of all covers of Aphex Twin.
Yeah, that was their breakout.
Yeah.
Their breakout record. Yeah, Alan's killer. I mean, all of
Yeah.
this.
So there's different fermentation going on, and particularly Bang on a Can, I feel like
They were big for
nurture that as well. Like, you know, bringing people who may not necessarily be in the new music world into that, even just to plop them into that environment, to, you know, so each world is exposed to each other. And, and so you get, you know, bands like Horse Lords who are, you know,
They're so interesting.
Yeah,
man. That is a really interesting. I've never seen them live, and I was
they're
kind of
amazing,
late to the
yeah.
party. I was just like checking them out.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I got to catch up. What's Horse Lords about?
yeah,
So yeah.
and they play in just intonation.
Yeah, that's right. Which
Yeah,
is
so it's like a really they've got a really interesting language which has connections to minimalism, but you know, rock, you know, kind of krautrock as well.
There's that element as well. The I think microtonality is like the next. I mean, it's been the next frontier for a while, but I mean, as far as in like DIY music, guitar-based music, electronic music, I feel like that's like on the way up. Like, have you checked out that guy Jute Geit? You know that guy?
No. Oh,
You've heard of him?
Yeah, I think maybe you or something.
I interviewed him.
Yeah.
His name's Adam Kalbach.
Yeah.
And but he goes by Juke. You should check this guy. I mean, it's like related sort of to black metal and extreme metal, but it's all like microtonal and really worked out, like compositional. Like he was talking about his stuff. It's like all, it's like brutal black metal, but with these like cantus firmus melodies under the bass line and these like, dealing with form and materials. That guy is the real deal.
It's interesting, the outer reaches of black metal. There's some kind of fascinating things happening there.
Yeah, it's still and not just Hunter either. There's a lot. It's like for a while I feel like she was like known as like the art black metal one, but now it's like really like expanded.
But you've dabbled in the dark arts yourself.
Yeah, I've dabbled in the dark arts. The dark arts have dabbled in me. The tentacles often go the other way inside. But done. I'm not dark anymore, man.
No more Psalm Zero?
Psalm Zero is going to still exist, but it's unclear what the next thing of it will be. Because the last record was like me with new people and wasn't with Hawk, so it's like it has changed what that even means. But I'm done being dark, man. I'm normal, man. That's my new thing. and then you say that to yourself and then you see what happens. It's like that.
Charlie Looker's version of normal is not necessarily.
Yeah, we'll see. It's a template to work within. You say like, I'm gonna do a jazz album, and then certainly not jazz by the time you're done with it. But it's like it's a starting point.
It's gonna be through your filter. Whatever I do is gonna be through my filter. Even if I try to do something, note for note, it's gonna have my elements in it.
Just like scent, man.
Yeah,
you can just it's like.
Sometimes sometimes I have to try really hard to challenge the sequence of notes that I'm about to put into this because they sound like me.
No, I know. I've had things like that where I write some little thing and I'm like, yeah, of course that's what you would do. Yeah. You love that. Like you just, But then people like, if people like your stuff, they do want, people love hearing a slightly different version of that little melodic cadence or like a slightly, like there is something to that, to like not holding back and just, it's interesting to hear you say how hard you are. I'm not surprised that you're a brutal critic of yourself, but to be that brutal of a critic of yourself and be this prolific, do you just like work on music all day essentially, or do you ever take like a week off, or are you just like?
No, I'm not really a big time off person, but and I work on music most days. Most of that is a lot of that is the scoring stuff, and then when there's a little break in the scoring, then I work on my own stuff. And I always have a long list of things to get to, but I also have I've got a big backlog of things that are done, that haven't come out. And so, that takes a while, these things to happen, and, making vinyl is a pain in the ass, and,
it is. I just keep doing it though. It's like, can't stay away from vinyl.
Well, it's getting harder and harder.
People buy it though. They still buy the stuff.
Yeah, well, it's the turnaround is what's killing me, I am in the midst of reissuing the second Foetus album, Ache, and it took 6 months to get a test pressing, and then the average turnover on getting an album press is 8 months at the moment.
At this point,
So I was corresponding with DJ Food, and he was projecting that people are going to return to CD because it's just faster, cheaper.
Yeah, it seems like some circles people do still completely buy CDs. Like in metal, it's like in straight up like death metal and black metal, people are just absolutely all over the CDs and the vinyl.
Personally, I'm a big champion of CDs. I think when they were introduced, I breathed a big sigh of relief because vinyl is not a good medium for me. Because my albums are not the right length for vinyl. I don't like to think in terms of, okay, for optimum sound quality, I've got to make this album 2 that are 18 minutes each. I make like 50-minute albums. And
Yeah.
they're not the right length for a double album. They're and they're dynamic, and CDs were a better medium for me, and then their CDs are a good archival medium. But vinyl is, and also I have a lot of sounds that battle in the mid-range.
Yes.
There's a lot of density in the mid-range, and vinyl's not always a good medium for that. Vinyl's a great medium for certain things,
Yeah.
and for dance music, and for jazz, and for
It is good for jazz, yeah.
things like that. But it's also a great fetish item, and it's
Coffee table book
and
kind
it's
of
great
vibe.
for artwork, and
Yeah.
So, but all mediums are kind of cool.
Yeah. Positive and negative for all of them.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, man. I'm feeling good.
Okay.
I'm feeling pretty solid, unless you have like final words, something you really need to get in there, something that people should definitely check out that's not you. I don't know, someone that needs a signal boost. I don't know.
Signal boost. Well, I publish a playlist on Tumblr every month.
That's
And
right.
so,
You do. Yes.
Yeah, so you can go to my Tumblr page, and if you want a signal boost.
Yeah. Most people here, I'm sure, like already know all your various like channels. And whatnot.
And apart from that, stay tuned.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. It's like it's never ending.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everyone. Should have said this up top, being a YouTuber, but like and subscribe, of course. It's implicit, but you may as well just click on that. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And this will be uploaded in podcast form, because that's how things are going now. I'm doing it's going to be on Spotify with the other live streams. And Jim, it's an honor to roll with you throughout the years, man.
Yeah, likewise.
It's been like a decade that I've known you, man.
Yeah, and I'm always looking forward to your next project.
Yeah, and just to come home and visit New York for a week, and I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Thirlwell studio. It's a beautiful thing, man. It means a lot to me.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.